In the past 12 months, we've seen a seismic shift in inbound traffic to our platform. So 12 months ago, ChatGPT or Perplexity, which are two of the most common chat agents used by learners, are now in the top 10 traffic referring sources for all of our publishers. For some of our publishers, in excess of 60% of their traffic is non-human. So it is a crawler or an agent of some kind, and that was very different a year ago.
Welcome to Insights Exchange, the podcast where we dive deep into the forces reshaping scholarly publishing. I'm your host, Nikesh Gosalia. Let's take a moment to appreciate the pace of transformation in scholarly publishing. It's 2025. AI tools are not just supporting, but accelerating the research pipeline. And publishing platforms are stepping up, evolving from service providers to strategic partners at the heart of this ecosystem. What's exciting is the range of possibilities. A wave of specialized agile platforms is emerging, offering fresh solutions, new models, and a renewed focus on user experience and innovation. So where is all of this heading? And how can platforms not just respond to this future? To help us break that down, we are joined by someone who's been driving change from the inside. Few people understand the inner workings of scholarly publishing quite like today's guest, combining deep product expertise with platform leadership and a commitment to serving the research community. Will Schweitzer began his publishing journey at Sage and went on to shape strategy and innovation at AAAS before bringing that product-first mindset to Silverchair, where he now serves as CEO. Will's perspective is shaped by decades of experience, and that makes him uniquely equipped to talk about the future of publishing platforms, modularity, and what true innovation looks like in academic publishing. But before we get into all of that, Will, we've heard that you are firmly in the pro-Oxford camp. Nothing splits a room of editors, platform architects, and linguists, quite like that tiny punctuation mark. So tell us, what is it about the Oxford comma that stirs up such fierce loyalties and opposition?
Oh gosh, I don't know what kind of background research you did on me, Nikesh. I've been in this industry for a really long time. My undergraduate degree is actually in professional writing. And one of the first kind of big projects I worked on was a revision of the American Psychological Association's style guide. So my job was to support the governance committee. The governance committee was kind of the editorial committee or approval board for the style guide. And we spent, 18 months thinking about all of these weird editing and style rules. And then I developed an appreciation for the Oxford comma. And a lot of that is maybe I read a lot and I read a little fast. And the Oxford comma is a good visual indicator for demarking listed information. But those were back in the days when we were still telling authors or students they needed to manually insert two spaces at the end of a sentence. So a lot has certainly changed since then.
Thanks for sharing that. And you are such a huge inspiration. I mean, not just to me, I've known you for, more than 11, 12 years now, but to many in this industry. And not just, for where you are today, but how you've got here. Can you take us back to the beginning and how did your journey in scholarly publishing start? What were some pivotal moments along the way?
Oh, great question. So as I just shared, I went to school and I got a degree in writing and I wanted to be an English teacher. And I lived in Maryland at the time and just outside Baltimore. And during semester breaks in college, I would work for my dad's company. One of my coworkers, his mom was an executive publisher at Lippincott Williams and Wilkins back in the day. And we got to talking and he told me that his mom was always looking for interns or folks to come help out. And because I'd worked on my college newspaper, I knew how to use Quark or to do early desktop design. And he thought that would be helpful to his mom. So I ended up interning with a very long-term mentor of mine, Susan Harris, who worked for Lippincott's Baltimore office. And what started out as a summer internship ended up with me working for her full-time and going to school full-time. And she was just great. And at some point along the way, she figured out that I knew how to do math and I could be a business analyst, and I could support her and the titles in her portfolio in figuring out what putting their journals online would mean. So, for instance, Lippincott had a huge medical portfolio. A lot of the revenues were coming from display advertising in the print issues. What was it going to mean if more of their audience was interacting with their content online? And how would they need to adapt their business model, say if they were to put all of their content into the Ovid database? And that was a great introduction to how publishing was changing. And I went with Susan from Lippincott Williams & Wilkins shortly after the Walter Kluwer acquisition to the American Psychological Association. And I was there for about 7-8 years. And that's where I really began working with editors and researchers, all of these PhD psychologists, to help them launch new journals. And it kind of gave me an appreciation for the research process, research ethics, what it meant to be in service to science. And then my career just kind of went from there. And the biggest change that kind of led me to where I am today was when I left Sage for Science. And that's when I stopped being just kind of your very straightforward journals publisher or editor running a list of titles to a more classical, or what we would now say is a more classical product management role. So thinking about all of the systems and processes and stakeholders necessary to produce a journal. So your manuscript submission systems, your content hosting platforms, your third-party partners like you, Nikesh, back in the day. And that kind of laid the stage for me becoming more involved in technology and thinking about how technology was transforming our industry. And that brought me to Silverchair.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Will. It's been a true inspiration. I also know, having seen you for so many years and also talking to so many of the team members, that leadership is something which is very important to you, and the way you work, you bring the team together. You're very big on empowering folks, trusting them. If you could just talk a little bit about, what has really shaped your journey in leadership, and what are one or two maybe key takeaways that listeners would benefit from?
Yeah, I lucked out in having a really good mentor, Susan Harris, who I mentioned. The way she helped me was to frame the outcomes, give me some advice on the process for achieving that outcome, and it just gave me room to learn and to try to figure things out. And she might connect me with another colleague, say in the finance department or on the advertising team, and that was really instructive. So she was very good at providing feedback, being supportive, and building those connections that were necessary to run a business or to run a journal. Along the way, I was always encouraged to participate in the industry. So someone like Sage would send me to AAP or PSP meetings or SSP meetings, which helped me build a lot of connections. So much was changing. Just, at times scholarly publishing feels like it moves so slow, but so much was changing in terms of our digital infrastructure, our business models, are now what seems like to dominate every conversation, research integrity issues, that it helped just to be very curious. And I think you can only be curious when you feel psychologically safe in the workplace, when you have a supportive team of colleagues. And I've tried to replicate the best bits of my job experience now in leading Silverchair. So we make a really big commitment to our kind of core values within the company. And those include just some really simple things that are actually very hard to pull off. So one of those is assuming positive intent. If you're working with your colleagues in this close and collaborative way, you can still sometimes have disagreements, and you can still have these moments of friction. And sometimes you can be upset by that, or sometimes you may be questioning a colleague's motive. But if you flip your mindset and you just start with this basic thing that, well, they're probably acting or responding in a way that is about achieving our common goals. So if we just step back and say they're probably acting with positive intent, we're probably misaligned somewhere upstream, or maybe they're responding to the energy I'm bringing to this meeting, it can get you into a more productive dialogue about what you're feeling, how you're responding, how your colleagues, what they're feeling, how they're responding. And that's really important. The other thing I believe in is that there are very few people who come into scholarly publishing purposefully. right? I've never met very few people. I suppose there are some folks that I've met that trained to be, say, a professional editor and then ended up being one. But we all need to facilitate on-the-job learning. And when I think about the technology changes we're all grappling with at the moment, there's no such thing as an expert in AI. And when I think about our developers, our software quality assurance engineers within Silverchair, we have to facilitate this environment for their learning and development to try to kind of encourage their curiosity, their applications of these technologies to help us fulfill our mission, to help us help our publishers. And creating that environment is absolutely essential. So for me, it is really all about empowering our folks, providing a safe environment, and just trying to be as decent of a human as you possibly can. And sometimes it means hard conversations. Sometimes it means establishing boundaries or setting firm expectations. So it isn't about just being a Pollyanna or just being overly agreeable, but it's doing it in a thoughtful or candid way.
Absolutely. No, thank you for sharing that, Will. And I think, very important lessons which resonate with me as well, and my work experience with Cactus, and some of the real emphasis that we've given over the years to look into the emotional aspect of things, like you correctly mentioned. And so it's not just about certain frameworks and just a way of conducting or designations, but also at that point of time, how is the other person really feeling, and how to manage that situation and balance it. But no, thank you for sharing that, Will. Obviously, no conversation these days is completed without talking about AI. But specific to our industry, we are seeing big shifts across the board. There is the so-called innovation coming through AI or disruption, if you may call that. There's tightening research budgets, changing maybe mandates, potentially from funders, governments. Change, of course, as we know, is a constant in publishing and any other vertical. But does this moment feel different to you? And how are you interpreting the scale and the direction of these macro level trends?
Oh, the past 24 months feel very different to me compared to, say, the slow evolution of open access, either as a movement or in implying a business model. And one of the things that I've been worried about when thinking about AI is that because I've been in this industry for so long, I'm kind of just cognitively programmed to assume change is slow, change is really incremental in our space. And I'm in a constant dialogue with my colleagues like Stuart Leach, our CTO, and some of our customers about risk or being attuned to the pace of, say, AI adoption or change in our workspace. We've just started to pull a whole bunch of data around non-human traffic and the rise of kind of chat agents. And those chat agents, either how we can use them internally, say for our developers or for our product staff, but more importantly, how students or researchers or doctors may be using those chat agents and workflows that this ecosystem, this community needs to support. I can only speak in generalities because I don't have the hard data in front of me, but in the past 12 months, we've seen a seismic shift in inbound traffic to our platform. So 12 months ago, ChatGPT or Perplexity, which are two of the most common chat agents used by learners, are now in the top 10 traffic referring sources for all of our publishers. For some of our publishers, in excess of 60% of their traffic is non-human. So it is a crawler or an agent of some kind. And that was very different a year ago. And there's been a lot of discussion about Cloudflare recently and technology that they are rolling out, say to block or create a more thoughtful or sustainable commerce model around publishers' content being crawled. And we're facilitating a dialogue within the community of Silverchair publishers. But it's this very simple notion that if 60% of a publisher's traffic is non-human, some percentage of that traffic, let's say it's a quarter, likely is a learner or a library patron trying to use ChatGPT or Claude in research mode to ask a question where our publisher's content could be a big or important part of the response. or of the solution, or of whatever job they're trying to do using these agentic frameworks. And thinking about our publisher's mission, about what we're all here to do, which is disseminate this content and make sure it is visible and used, that we need to figure out how to appropriately engage with these new consumption patterns, with these new distribution pathways. And that's going to be a monumental challenge because it is different technologies, it is different ways of delivering content. Aspects of delivering content this way actually runs contrary to how we built out a lot of our platforms over the past decade, runs contrary to our current business models. So this is a big challenge. And in this space, and particularly with AI technologies, what we're talking about within Silverchair today is very different than what we were doing 6 months ago. So keeping up with the potential changes or the applications of these technologies and what it means is now receiving a disproportionate amount of our attention. And is one of the ways that I feel like the pace of change we all need to navigate is a lot faster, or the current is a lot swifter than it used to be. I'm not ready to call it a disruption, but I think it's going to take some creative thinking.
No, I agree with you. And there is one aspect which is technology and AI and some of the things that we just spoke about, Will. But there is the other element, which is the whole issue around, research funding and the challenges that come with that. And there's been a lot of concern specifically around the NIH budget cuts in the US. What does that mean for the broader research ecosystem? Is it something which is a red flag? Is it something which is, still evolving? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Let's start with, I think the last thing our community needed was to operate with greater uncertainty. And it is hard to predict what the outcomes of U.S. federal budget and policy decisions are going to be. I would say between green, yellow, and red, some of the things that have shifted within the U.S. context are red flags and others are yellow. So we think about research funding, for instance. In the U.S., the federal government funds a small but important proportion of overall research within the country. And particularly if we were to zoom out, we were to think globally, U.S. agencies like the NIH or the National Science Foundation are a significant but not the predominant funding body. There are some research disciplines like biomedicine who may feel shifting NIH funding commitments much more acutely than others, say in the humanities and social sciences. But the red flags are actually, I think, around challenges to normative practices within scholarship. So by and large, this is a community that has made appreciable investments and had a lot of discussion and affirmed the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the kind of multidisciplinary and global nature of science and cross-border facilitation. And all of those things are being challenged. Many of these things have been challenged for a really long time, right? Geopolitics comes into play in science all the time. A decade ago, we reached a flashpoint around U.S.-China relationships and actually very deep connections between the Chinese Academy and the U.S. Academy in research, particularly in sensitive IP areas, whether that was computer chip design or applications of technology that have import for, say, national security or defense. It feels like all of those pressures have now tripled at the moment, and we're in this pressure cooker environment. So I think what's really important for many members of the community is just to reflect that science is global. In many cases, our authors and our readers and our stakeholders, whether that's our society members or our board members or whatever it may be, have a responsibility to a global enterprise and kind of a global calling for what science and scholarship can do. And if we think about that, it can help us clarify the decisions we need to make in the short term about our budget impacts, how we think about research dollars trickling down to library budgets, which ultimately become, say, subscription or APC spend for our publishers, or even things like global conference attendance. And for our societies that host U.S. Conferences in the U.S., that they may lose a proportion of their global registrants and visitors and what that could mean. I think it is important to be measured it is important to try to gather the data we can and do the best scenario planning that we can. I don't know, by the time we get around to 2026, we'll know an awful lot more about the impacts for our space, Nikesh. I'm a firm believer in TACO, though. I mean, the Trump always chickens out acronym that was kind of first written about in the Financial Times in the UK, that has certainly proven true in some applications of tariffs and reciprocal tariffs with U.S. trade policy. Who knows how that is going to play out over the coming months for various aspects of the U.S. approach to science.
Yeah, no, I'm hoping for that as well, to be honest, Will. I think I was talking to somebody and just kind of digressing a little bit, but just talking about the stock markets, and somebody was just telling me that I think now we've started to factor in some of these things, and as a result, not reacting to some of these, because eventually things will more or less normalize, and so there's just no point overthinking, overanalyzing this. But no, I'm hoping that happens as well, Will, and things settle down, and some of these uncertainties are no longer there. One of the other issues, of course, that has dominated our industry over the last 12 to 18 months has been research integrity, and you briefly spoke about it as well. So with growing concerns around paper mills and data manipulation, AI-generated content, research integrity is under the spotlight like never before. I also, just thinking about publishers, I know that they're in a slightly kind of tricky challenge as well. There are some business realities. I think almost all of the big publishers who can report this publicly, everyone's mentioned there's been a huge jump in number of submissions, but the actual output is lesser. That still means you have to process all of these papers. You still have to run as many checks, and you have to be extra careful in what comes in. From your perspective, what role should publishing platforms play in upholding integrity across the scholarly communication chain? And are we doing everything possible, or can we do more?
Whoa, really big question. So to start, I think publishers and the platforms publishers use are an important part of ensuring research integrity. And stepping back even further than that, when I think about when I entered the publishing industry, this is an overgeneralization, but as a publisher, the responsibility for peer review and the normative and oftentimes implicit practices in that process were seen as the role of the academy, right? We were the business people. We would provide the production services. We would provide the distribution channels and platforms, the sales and marketing folks. But it was ultimately about our editors or our society partners or the normative practices, say, within the field, say the peer review practices that would be promulgated by an anchor society or association in the space, whether it's the American Psychological Association or a group like the Council of Science Editors. That was kind of the academy's job. And it wasn't that there was a strict firewall, like we talk about magazines having the business and editorial functions, but it meant as a publisher, we didn't have a deep knowledge of peer review. Or the importance of processes and checks and review, that over time, I think has become more of the publisher's responsibility. And I think some of this was a shift into open access models or publishers launching kind of large sound science journals where we had to figure out how to build scalable processes to support things like peer review. Because back then, one of the big value differentiators, one of the ways that we thought we could create winning products was actually being of greater service to authors, particularly in time to publish. And a big kind of chunk of the time to get an article from submission to publish is actually the peer review process itself, which meant publishers had to start thinking carefully about peer review and understanding it. I think publishers and their platforms are a really important gateway. And because of the increasing volume of submissions, the scale at which we operate, the increasingly global and multidisciplinary world we operate in, it is up to us to participate in the community to define best practices. There aren't going to be a normative set of research integrity solutions or peer review practices that are going to work how peer review is approached in high energy physics is very different than social psychology, which means that we need to build out our systems and processes to respect those needs of those communities. And because all of peer review, whatever the standard is, sound science or wanting to assess novelty, really comes down to expert human decisions. And we're asking these human experts who are really busy with lots of things to give us their time and attention. We have to try to make their jobs easier. When I think about what publishers do to facilitate manuscript submission and peer review, we have essentially assigned more tasks to our editorial coordinators or assistants, or to our content production partners, or increasingly a whole new set of experts that we're bringing into the process. And I think there's a lot of ways that technology can help them. I think what I think about, particularly with the ScholarOne platform, is how can I leverage our expertise to create a baseline set of checks, largely reflecting data insights that we can gather from the manuscript itself and from the peer review process to say this manuscript deserves extra scrutiny, whether that is a human expert involved in the academy facilitating peer review, or more sophisticated solutions that may rely on third-party data sets, or really technically sophisticated solutions, something like image twin, for example, to evaluate a manuscript. Because a lot of those things result in incremental costs. And as a platform, just given the sheer volume of publishers that we support, or the number of submissions that we can support, we tend to be able to do things more cost effectively at scale. That's just a function of how SaaS works, right? The bigger you are, the more efficient things tend to be. So if we can do baseline checks that help out all of our publishers, and then they can bring in kind of specialist third-party solutions or partners to help evaluate them, that seems to be a sensible approach. Or at least that is our product strategy today. Maybe really different come next year, but that's what we're thinking about.
Talking about platforms, Will, we've seen some publishers who are trying to build platforms in-house, some organizations who have and continue to make attempts to custom build. For Silverchair, of course, you acquired ScholarOne. From your perspective, what made ScholarOne the right choice for you? And looking ahead, how do you see the platform ecosystem evolving over the next, say 3 to 4 years?
Let's talk about ScholarOne first. When I think about what Silverchair does well, and I think about how our company has grown, and I think the reputation that we have in the market, we know how to run complex scaled platforms well. Always things we can do better, right? And I'm sure I have some customers that might scoff at that at the moment. But by and large, running complex scaled multi-tenant platforms is a really difficult thing to do. It's not for the faint of heart. And as a publisher, I have made mistakes around what technology, what platforms we could build and sustain in-house. And I get a little worried anytime I see anybody but the largest commercial publishers kind of try to build and maintain their own in-house platforms. And some of that comes down to just the economics of software platforms, which is you have to achieve sustainable scale. Platforms require continual reinvestment. There's no such thing as standing still. You can't build a platform and just forget about it, right? Like we make massive investments in accessibility, in non-functional requirements around things like security, or in page performance, or forbid trying to keep up with Google and what that means for SEO. And Google still drives, even in this world of chat agents, 40 to 50% of a lot of our publishers' traffic. So that means we need to keep up with their SEO standards. That's really hard for a reasonably sized commercial publisher to do, let alone a nonprofit. And then you add into this that you need a lot of product and technology experts to help you build and maintain platforms, to help you rationalize the complexity of our ecosystem. Let's face it, scholarly publishing is a really complex ecosystem between standards, integrating with libraries, the needs of all of our stakeholders. So that means you need a lot of human experts. And human experts from everything from software developers to business analysts who can talk to publishers and understand their needs and translate what that means to a multi-tenant platform. publishers, and particularly society publishers, aren't always in the best position to attract and then retain that talent for the long run. So it worries me when I see publishers developing their own technology. Where do I think the platforms are going is that we now are operating in a more complex ecosystem with a faster pace of change. And that requires us to make substantial investments in some of the systems that we have. It's one of the reasons that I'm really thankful that the Silverchair business is sound and growing, because it means that we can invest millions of dollars a year, say, in modernizing ScholarOne. ScholarOne was the right investment for us because we know how to run complex platforms. We have the financial capabilities to invest in the platform, and we have an appreciation for this space and what it needs. So I think platforms are getting an awful lot of investment. We talk about the Silverchair content hosting platform is becoming headless, which is the journal is no longer a website or a destination a lot of traffic is going to come to. And that means that we essentially need to become a hub for publishers in all sense of ways, whether that is the submission system, linking to third-party solutions to help facilitate research integrity checks, or the content hosting system becoming more of a content management solution, helping publishers syndicate their content and get data back about how their content is being used in the world.
Talking about the complex ecosystem, Silverchair serves both society publishers and large commercial entities. How do you manage the trade-offs between driving innovation, ensuring stability, and accommodating legacy systems, especially when client needs and resources vary so widely?
Oh, very carefully. Listen, it's something that's really hard to get right. And so there are some really simple things that we have come to accept as true. And maybe these truths will be challenged with the pace of change in the coming years. One of those is all of our clients value stability over anything else. When we think about the platforms that we host, their core infrastructure. They're platforms that serve some of their most important stakeholders, whether that's the authors or editors, or they're the platforms that host all of their products and therefore underpin their revenue streams. And we often talk about this stability in terms of uptime, right? It is a really bad day for us and our clients if our platforms go down. So we have to think really carefully about the quality of the work we do, how we check to ensure we're not releasing bugs or causing software regressions, and making sure these systems operate in a smooth manner as possible. That is often at odds with our ability to move quickly. One of the things platforms do with their scale is increase efficiency within the ecosystem and drive down long-term cost of ownership. And the way you can think about this is that the Silverchair content hosting platform is supported by 40 or so publishers. All those publishers pay one tiny wedge of the overall cost pie for running that platform and supporting folks like me and all the technologists that run it. So it's kind of cost sharing in a way. But that also means that we have to play this orchestration role, which is some of our publishers have old components in their stack or old back office systems that we support. Some of our publishers are relatively new in the grand scheme of things. So they haven't been around for 100 years and are relative upstarts with relatively new stacks, which means that we need to develop flexible software with sound architecture and integration points that can support publishers where they are. That comes down to an awful lot of complexity. Not all of that complexity is tech debt, but it means that we have to be thoughtful managers or thoughtful developers, new aspects of our platform. So when we do something for one of our publishers, we have to make sure it works for all 40. If we talk about adding a new content feature, that means we may need to update our JATS content specification and then our loader and then our front-end widgets. And then we have to check that those widgets, those changes will work for all 40 of our publishers, but then meet accessibility and page performance criteria. That's an awful lot of work to do. And a friction point that we have in some of our client relationships, or even with some of our third-party partners that want to integrate with our platforms, is that orchestration can take time and it comes at cost. But the trade-off of that cost is stability. It is kind of lower cost of ownership for an individual publisher or for the community at large. But it sometimes means we move a little slower, or things cost a bit more than if you were just making a one-off change for one publisher. So by and large, it's a challenge we face. I think we get it right more often than we don't. I recognize that some publishers always want us to be a little more affordable or a little faster, but it's often hard to zoom out and think about all the other trade-offs or all the other benefits along the way.
And just talking about some of the smaller mission-driven publishers or societies, Will, from your perspective, and this might be slightly generic in nature, where are platforms falling short, keeping these stakeholders in mind? What specific gaps do you think need urgent attention? With some of the consolidation accelerating and costs also rising at the same time, are smaller society publishers getting squeezed out? And how do we ensure their relevance?
There's two things that I think about. The first thing that I think about isn't necessarily cost and a small publisher's ability to pay for third-party solutions. The first thing I think about is actually complexity. There's complexity in two forms. One is, if you think about all the things that a publisher has to do, facilitating peer review or the editorial evaluation of the content, preparing that content, packaging it up, delivering it, and then selling it globally, that's an awful lot for a publisher to keep track of. That's a lot of experts that they have to have in-house. There's a lot of ecosystem or marketplace complexity that they're going to have to deal with. And I thought about this a lot when I was really engaged with the institutional licensing or the sales team at Science, which is Science is this really big brand, right? It's a leading journal in our space, but it's actually a relatively small program. And we tried to sell Science globally using sales agent partners to consortia throughout the world. But ultimately, it was a core team of just a handful of individuals that was trying to make this global apparatus work. And it was really hard to do that at the scale of Science. And the same could be true for a small publisher trying to launch new open access journals or support multidisciplinary reference work. You're going to need to bring in different set of experts or ask your staff to learn and stretch their capabilities, potentially do more with less. And that's really hard for a small publisher to do, right? Like they may have these grand product ideas, but they may not have the dollars to invest in new product development or research and design. So when I think about like our platforms and the tooling that we provide, we have to make our publishers' jobs as easy as possible. Some of that, say for the Silverchair platform, means making our core platform tools easier to use. So it is really rare that you run into a marketer that's going to be an expert in editing HTML. And there are some aspects of our platform where occasionally a person will have to edit HTML, say to make a journal homepage or a landing page look just as they want it to do. It's our job to kind of reduce that complexity, make their jobs easier. And there are older platforms in our space. Older platforms aren't necessarily a bad thing, but it means that we need to kind of invest in keeping up and meeting our users where they are. And that's a job for us to do. It was a really long answer, but I don't even know that I answered all the parts of your question.
No, you did. It makes sense, Will. And talking a little bit about modularity and interoperability, how essential is it for platforms to integrate seamlessly with services like ORCID, Crossref, variety of AI tools? Can the industry afford the inefficiencies that arise when platforms operate in silos? Because here's the counter argument maybe that I keep hearing. So sure, modularity sounds great in theory, but clients actually want seamless, integrated experiences. They don't want to manage 10 different vendors. So how do you respond to that? And is the industry's push towards modularity solving real problems, or is it creating new ones?
Oh, so I'm not a technologist. but I have now been in Silverchair for 6 years, and I have a far deeper appreciation and understanding of technology than I did the 15 years I was a publisher before I joined the firm. And I think our industry uses words like modularity the wrong way. And just like we use words like legacy the wrong way, which is kind of painting over an awful lot of complexity or an underinvestment in our technology and our workflow processes in our space. You do not necessarily need modularity to achieve interoperability or adherence to industry standards. One thing is really certain, though. If you are a serious solution provider in our space, whether you're a platform or you're a content or editorial service provider, you need to meet industry standards because this complex ecosystem we all operate in is dependent on those standards, whether that is adhering to JATS conventions, NISO recommendations, reporting usage data in counter-compliant ways, all of these things. It really all comes down to coordination across diverse stakeholders, between publishers and libraries, which is still one of the primary content distribution channels in our market. Maybe that's changed with these chat agents, but increasingly is actually going to be these emerging standards and protocols like remote MCP that are all about getting our valuable knowledge to these agents itself. It's our jobs as platforms to facilitate that. No question about it. It doesn't necessarily require modularity, though. And those standards exist to try to make those kind of handoffs or friction points a lot easier. But a lot of that comes down to being thoughtful stewards of technology and being able to reinvest.
I think I love the way you explained the whole point about modularity, Will, and also included the whole point about legacy. I mean, that's something which, to be honest, maybe that's the wrong way I was also thinking, or that was a construct in my mind. But I think the way you explained that we are using legacy in a wrong way and really undermining some of the complexities and not appreciating that. And I think, that stayed with me, and something which I think it'll help me to create more awareness, among our community as well. I think potentially on similar lines, Will, I know that in a world where researchers, publishers, readers, everyone, is expecting seamless and very, very intuitive interactions. From a user experience point of view, what is the single biggest opportunity you see for improving UX on scholarly platforms? We've all been using platforms, academic platforms, for years. And honestly, I don't want to say it in that context, but sometimes it just feels like, okay, they are very archaic in the way they operate. Everyone talks about user experience, but why does it feel like, we are still so far behind consumer web standards? Is this a technology problem according to you, a business model problem, just resistance to change or complexity or something else entirely?
All of the above. Here's why I've talked for years about the value of product managers and how they're necessary for nearly any organization in our space, which is a product expert. The core of their function is understanding their stakeholders, their users, and the jobs they are trying to do. When I think about platforms and digital products in our market, it's important to remember that a lot of publishers achieved digital parity, so a digital facsimile of a print product during COVID, right? So we are not an industry of digital natives. That's not what we are. And the complexity of our ecosystem meant that we replicated a lot of our print conventions and print practices in digital ways. We built websites that represented the catalogs we used to take into libraries to sell them products. We created virtual bookshelves, right? Like that was a thing, the first 5 years of my career. And by and large, what a user of a journal, what they wanted to do was to conduct, say, a Google Scholar or a Medline search, find the most relevant article, click a link, be authenticated, read the abstract of that article, maybe click on a related article that was suggested by the platform, download a PDF, maybe get a suggested citation and pull that into the reference management solution and leave. And all of that would happen, even in the old times, within 3 minutes and 2 or 3 page visits. And we built out these really, really complex products that oftentimes got in the way of that really simple user journey. And sometimes that is because publishers have other stakeholders like book authors, journal editors, their own members that had these other use cases. And I think a challenge for publishers in the past decade is to understand all of those stakeholders, all of those end users, and the jobs to be done and appropriately weighting them. The most important thing I think for end users these days is making content discoverable in the tools they're using. So your users are out there. It's part of your job to go find them. That's kind of the way the modern web works, right? We spend an awful lot of time in the early 2000s building these digital destinations, and increasingly publishers' strategy is to make sure their content is available in multiple places in multiple ways, and then have some dollar flow back. And maybe that is less about selling subscription these days and more about third-party content licensing. And of course, publishers need tools to support them and all of that. So I don't know. The world's changing, and it's changing pretty fast. And the most exciting thing we're working on with our publishers today is tools like Perplexity being used by K through 12 students. More sophisticated agentic solutions are increasingly being used by practitioners, by folks in labs, and it's an entirely different way of content delivery and content consumption. So how do we evolve our ecosystem and our technology to go meet the user where they are? Very different world for us.
Absolutely. I'm sure you've thought about this at least a few times, if not more, Will. If you could design the ideal publishing platform from scratch without any constraints, any thoughts on what would you build, and more importantly, perhaps, what would you deliberately not include or not build?
Yeah, it's a really fun question. But if we go back to our users and what they're trying to achieve, I'm gonna think just about hosting platforms for a minute here and ground my answer there, because it could get really complicated if we get into the peer review space, right? We built a lot of complexities into our content hosting platforms. One of the assumptions that we made 15 years ago was that we needed to take a piece of content, whether it is a book or a book chapter or a journal article, and we needed to break it down into all of these really tiny pieces. So we would take a journal article and we essentially deconstruct it into all of these XML fragments that we would semantically enrich. We would say, this is a figure, this is a table, kind of anticipating this world where that atomization of content was going to be really important. And I think we got it wrong, right? We atomized the entire thing rather than saying, well, maybe it was the underlying data set that we needed to treat as one atom that we could then distribute elsewhere or link to separately. But when I think about 60% of the inbound requests to our platforms being non-human, that atomization and that enrichment is less important. And what becomes increasingly important is efficiently delivering the content in JSON or even as a flat PDF into that environment, which means we have to eliminate a hell of a lot of complexity and therefore an awful lot of costs in optimizing that content delivery pathway. And that means we can do away with an awful lot of things and an awful lot of cost that is even inherent in serving a journal article to a publisher, which is fractions of a cent, but it actually adds up at the scale all of our publishers or even the Silverchair platform operates at. I think we serve over 1 billion pieces of content a year, which means fractions of a penny add up awfully fast. In an ideal world, there are some conventions that we are bound to that I actually think are rate limiters to change. And some of that comes down to things like IP authentication, which is rooted in the library as being the access point or the purchaser of scholarly literature. IP authentication is probably the best solution we have at the moment at scale to make sure libraries' patrons can get access to content, but it creates an awful lot of friction. I think about things like Counter, and I'm not out here to besmirch Counter. It's a community-based standard. Tasha and others get a lot of input from publishers, but at the moment, the Counter standard doesn't account for, or it doesn't say sufficiently value non-human traffic, which we know is a valid use of our content and therefore the value proposition of the publisher. That's just something that absolutely has to change. the most exciting thing we've been thinking about. And so have a lot of other kind of smart technologies and products in our space like Cassini, which is in this non-human world, there are still stakeholders that it is important to have a connection with. Authors are certainly one of them. And if we think about this notion of a lot of our digital products being print facsimiles, how we represent journals today is a function of that. You go to a site and there's the latest published articles, which by and large look like an issue or may even be called an issue, which is decidedly a print convention. But if you turn that on its head and you say authors choose where to publish because they want their articles to be read by their peers, and then you begin thinking of a journal as a social network of authors and readers and experts who all deserve to connect or desire to connect with each other. We think about a journal as anchoring a community. Then I think there's a lot that we can do with our technology to serve our human readers if we think about them that way. And there's publishers that have been experimenting along these lines for a really long time. And I'm thinking about a company of biologists and some of their platforms like Prelights, uncertain about the commercial sustainability of that approach, but it's very important to their mission. And it is, I think, all about trying to facilitate experts getting the content that they need and understanding that content and what it can mean, say, for practical outcomes or for further research. And I think publishers play a role in that, and technology can help facilitate that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Will. And ending on a lighter note, like I promised. So obviously, in terms of your areas of interest, I know a couple of them. One is, of course, you love reading books. One that I came to know today, which is Oxford Commerce. The other one, which also I think we've spoken in the past, which is, interest in rescue dogs. But the one which has been a revelation for me as well is the deep research or the knowledge that you have about the best pillow brands.
Oh,
yeah.
Yes.
So that's a new one for me as well, Will. So maybe just besides work, I mean, how do you generally spend your time? And does every area for you, whichever is your interest, has to be, I don't know, just deep research? You need to know everything about it, or just how do you spend your time? And you can double click on the pillow brands if you'd like.
No, so sleep is so important, right? Right. For all types of physiological or even mental and spiritual reasons, right? Sleep is really important. And I have a terrible back. And one of the things that I've learned is finding a pillow that works for you is one of the best gifts you can give yourself. And I can tell you, I probably tested 14 different pillows. And the danger of that is it's really hard to return pillows. And a lot of people, of course, don't want a pillow that somebody else has tried, which means that it's a lot of really expensive trial and error. And I am this deeply curious person. I often get into trouble because I will go, I used to refer to it as the Wikipedia rabbit hole, where I will encounter something like plane trees in Berkeley Square here in London, beautiful trees that I know absolutely nothing about. I'm like, they vaguely look like a birch tree where I'm from in the States. So then you end up doing a search for trees in Berkeley Square in London, which tells you about the plane trees, which means I'm clicking on a Wikipedia article to read about these trees and how long they've been in London. And then there'll be a citation to some really great ecological research on these trees and where they came from, and that you can find them in France. And before you know it, I've lost 45 minutes to an hour of my day because I thought trees in Berkeley Square were pretty. And I do that on an awful lot of things. And it's the fun thing. One of the things that I tried to afford myself the times to go down these rabbit holes because there's a lot of there's a lot of value, or there's a lot of insights that you can get from being a broad reader. People often think about that in terms of what they would hear about Warren Buffett or what they would hear about other kind of world-spanning CEOs. But the smartest intellectuals, the smartest researchers I've ever met in my life, people that I had been very fortunate to work with. And I'm thinking very particularly about Susan Fiske, who ran a social science lab at Princeton University forever. Susan was one of my journal editors. She was chair of a lot of the governance boards at American Psychological Association, and I still got to work with her when I was at Sage. I don't think there was anything she didn't read, which meant she was able to pull in these analogies. She was a very thoughtful storyteller, and all of that meant she could explain all of her expertise, all of her accumulated knowledge, her way of looking at the world and synthesizing data so much more effectively. So I'm happy to talk about pillows at any point in time, but I will just recommend to everyone that there are really good resources out there like Wirecutter, but personal experimentation is often what it comes down to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, but thanks for sharing. I mean, that's obviously was what started on a lighter note, Will, but I really appreciate the fact that there's a very important point there, which is, I think, we all need to be curious. We need to really, go and expand our knowledge for lack of a better term. And I think what you referred to as, you spend maybe 45 minutes into it, I think is great, because I think a lot of us, honestly, have lost that focus, that rigor. And, we just kind of, keep maybe toggling from one thing to another. And the depth is missing sometimes. So, no, I think thank you for sharing that and reiterating a very important point through that.
Oh, thank you.
That was an insightful look at an industry in rapid transformation. Will Schweitzer didn't just give us insights into platform strategy. He gave us a roadmap for understanding how technology, business models, and academic values are colliding in ways that will shape scholarship for decades to come. A huge thank you to you, Will, for your candid perspective on these complex challenges.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Nikesh. I really appreciate the questions you ask. It's really nice to stop and reflect on what all of this means.
No, thank you. Thank you as always, Will. I mean, I always enjoy our conversations, and I think this is just for the greater benefit. I think all of the listeners would really appreciate. And like I said, you've been a huge source of inspiration for everyone, including me.
Thank you very much.
If this conversation sparked ideas or concerns, I'd love to hear from you. I always enjoy a good conversation on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with me there and join the discussion or drop a comment on any of my posts. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Follow Insights Exchange where you get your podcasts, and don't forget to share this episode with colleagues who are grappling with the same questions. Thank you for listening.